Welcome back, everyone. So this is the second part of the lecture on strategy of international business. So what we talked about was organization structure, profitability, profit growth, and we talk about strategic fit. We talk about value creation activities, economies of scale, learning effect, experience curve economies, and location economies. And we said that the optimal location of your production could be anywhere in the world. And you need to decide this as a firm, right? So that was the first part of the section on strategy. Now I'm going to be talking now on the second part about what actual strategy you're going to be using as an international business itself, right? So let me share my screen. All right. So a global firm faces normally two pressures, right? So there are two competitive pressures that you will be facing once you enter the global marketplace. One is the pressures for cost reduction. That is, you feel pressure that you need to cut back on your cost. That is, you need to lower down your cost. And number two, the pressures for local responsiveness, right? Do you need to respond to the local market needs, right? So can you respond? Do you need to respond? Do you need to customize your product to that particular market, or you can just provide your product as it is, right? So these are the two pressures that you're going to be facing, and you need to decide what kind of pressures you have, because those two pressures will determine your strategy. And these two pressures, they place conflicting demands on the firm, right? Sometimes they work in opposite directions. So you need to be very careful about here to understand those pressures. So what are pressures for cost reduction? Pressures for cost reduction, that is, you have a pressure to cut back on your cost. And these will be the greatest pressures when there are major competitors based in low cost locations, right? So this is something important. If you have a lot of competitors or major competitors which are based in low cost locations in the world, then you will be faced with a need to cut back on your costs. Your cost reduction pressure is going to be very high. If there are persistent excess capacity, you will also be faced with a pressure to cut back on your costs. And where consumers are powerful and they face low switching costs, right? Low switching costs means that they can switch from product A to product B very quickly. So for example, in India, people drink a drink called Thumbs Up, which is like a Pepsi product, and then there is Coke, and there is Sprite. But sometimes people don't care about which product they drink. They are okay to switch between Thumbs Up and a Coke, right? So if I am indifferent between a Thumbs Up and a Coke, it means that the switching cost for me is very low. That is, if I am drinking a Thumbs Up, I'm happy. If I don't get a Thumbs Up, I drink a Coke. And if I don't get a Coke, I may be drinking a Thumbs Up or a Sprite. So if I am that kind of customer, then it means that I can switch between product A, B, or C, right? So when that happens, then it means that competitors now can come into this market and provide a different product very easily and steal away your market share. So if you had Coke in the market, there was no Thumbs Up, I just come in and provide Thumbs Up, people can move away from the Coke and drink the Thumbs Up. So that means customers face low switching costs, right? Now, in some markets, consumers are very powerful. They dictate the terms of trade. So consumers maybe, for example, want to have a leather bag, which is blue in color, right, with red stripes. So that makes it demanding, right? It's demanding because it is hard to find a blue leather bag with red stripes, okay? So if consumers are powerful, they organize themselves, they are intelligent, they have access to social media today, right? They read a lot, they talk about different products, They go on TikTok and explain all these different things out there. So consumers are getting knowledge. Knowledge is power. So consumers are becoming very powerful. If consumers are becoming powerful, then businesses cannot really fool those consumers, right? So you need to be transparent in your organization. You need to be transparent about your product. So when these things happen, then you as a firm, you will need to cut back on your cost because these are high pressures to cut back on your cost. Now, pressures for cost reduction are also greatest in industries that produce commodity type products, right? Commodity type products, which are universal needs product, right? What are universal needs? They are needs that exist when taste and preferences of consumers in different nations are similar, if not identical, right? So for example, we take salt, all right? So salt tend to become a universal need product, okay? The kind of salt I eat and the kind of salt that people eat in Boston or maybe in England or maybe in China or maybe in South Africa, they are not very much different. They are very similar in a way. So if that is true, then the product becomes a universal need product. When you have products which are universal needs, the main weapon of competition is the price. If I can get $1 a pound of salt in the US, but in China I can get it for 50 cents, I will buy the salt from China. But if I can get it for 20 cents in South Africa, I'll buy it from South Africa, right? So products which are like petroleum, iron and steel, right? So all these products tend to be commodity type products. They are universal need products, right? That is the tastes and preferences of consumers, they're pretty much the same. They may not be identical. Sometimes they are identical, but overall, they are so similar that people don't really worry about where to get them from. They will buy the cheapest one because the quality is pretty much the same. Now, firms facing pressures for cost reduction, right? It means that the C here, the cost, needs to be reduced, right? They must try to lower the cost of value creation. And how do they do that? They need to do mass production. And where do they need to do that? They need to do it at an optimal location. And the optimal location is where? Is anywhere in the world where you can get economies of scale and you can reduce your cost per unit to make your VC go up. The value creation activity, the value created should go up. That is, you need to cut back on your C so that the VC, the value created, goes up. So firms that face pressures for cost reduction, that is firms which are providing universal needs type product, right? They need to cut back on the cost of production. So they cannot, if they are producing it in the United States, it's too expensive, they need to produce it maybe in Zimbabwe, in Africa, where it might be cheaper, right? Because the US consumer will want something cheap, and then they will not pay for a higher price. If they can get it cheaper from Zimbabwe, they will buy it from Zimbabwe, right? So a typical example will be here, the salt, right? So I will just import the salt from Zimbabwe because it's cheaper, all right? Now, the pressures for local responsiveness, okay? That is the need to respond to the local market. That is the second kind of pressure that you're gonna face, all right? So this is something very important too, right? So in the US, for example, people like to run huge cars, all right? People like big cars here, right? And they love to have like large pickup trucks, right? So you have a family, let's say mom, dad, 3 kids, 2 dogs and 1 cat, right? And then you need to have your bike, right? Couple of bikes, you need to put that in your car because everybody likes biking, right? You have your camping gear that you need to throw at the back of your truck. So a small car cannot accommodate all of these, right? And cost of gas here is relatively cheaper. Petrol is very compared to other parts of the world is very cheap compared to Europe, for example, it's cheaper. So even though it's rising, it's still cheaper. So people here can afford to buy large pickup trucks, and they prefer to have large cars. So that's the US model. But in Europe, cars are normally smaller, right? SUVs even are smaller in Europe, right? In India, there is something called the nano car, the Tata Nano, which is a small car which is designed for um, a young couple, for example, a small family, a middle income class family who cannot afford a BMW or a Mercedes or a Jaguar or big brand car, but they need a car for the family, so they will buy a smaller car, right? And also roads in India are very congested. So running big cars in rural areas is very difficult, right? So you see that there is a high need to respond to the local market, right? So which means that if you are in such a market, you're coming to the US to, let's say, produce cars or sell cars in the US market, you need to know that you need to have big cars. But if you're going to Europe, you need to know that you need to have smaller cars. The price of oil and gas in Europe is pretty expensive, pretty high. So people need to pay attention to those, right? So another example is local responsiveness here would be when Walmart came to China, as probably you would know, when Walmart came to China, they provided frozen fish. Because of cultural differences, they don't understand that people in China need to have fresh, live fish. Okay, so that's a cultural thing. In the US, people buy frozen fish, frozen meat, and stock it in their fridge, in a huge fridge for a couple of weeks or months. But in Europe, people like to have fresh vegetables and fresh meat. They will go to the market very often to buy things. French people will go to the vegetable market to buy fresh vegetables, right? But in the US, some people do that, but most people don't. They will just go to the supermarket and buy it and put it in the fridge for a few months, right? Now, Walmart failed in China because they did not pay attention to the local market need of the consumers in China, that people want to have fresh fish, right? So they fail because of that reason. All right. So you'll be surprised, but this is one of the major reasons why they failed in the beginning. And then um, they had to change that model and then provide fresh fish. So that is related to the second piece, which is consumer taste and preferences, right? So if consumers like pickup trucks, like in the US, they like large pickup trucks, but in Europe, they like smaller vehicles, then you need to provide them with smaller vehicles, right? If people in California, they like to run electric cars, so you need to have electric cars, electric vehicles. So one of the reasons why Tesla is successful here in Northern California is because people are very conscious about the environment. People want to have no pollution, and people are getting, of course, tax benefits and other benefits. But in addition to those, people are very conscious about the environment, and they don't want to create pollution. They want to buy electric vehicles. So if that is the need of the consumer, then you need to provide that need. All right. In Texas, we have much less of those because oil is very cheap down there. Gas is cheap. So people can provide large trucks. And the tastes and preferences of consumers may be different from Northern California, right? Texas is a heavy oil and gas based economy. Northern California is a very clean energy kind of an economy. So consumers are very different too. Firms also need to understand that there might be differences in infrastructure and traditional practices. Okay, so for example, in North America, in the US, we have a 110-volt system. In Europe, it is based on 230 volts. In the US, the outlets, the plugs on the wall outlets, they look like this, okay? One hole on top, two at the bottom here. And in the UK, it is one on top and two at the bottom, right? So, and it is square, and this one is rectangular, right? So if you have your computer, you can look at your computer computer plug right now and see how it looks like. Will that fit in the US outlet? If it doesn't fit, it means that when you come to the US, you need to have an adapter to make sure that it fits. Now, people here from the US, when they go to UK, they need to make sure that they need to have an adapter for the UK, right? So basically, differences in infrastructure, in traditional practices will build high pressures for local responsiveness. Okay, Walmart failed in Germany when they entered Germany too. They failed in Germany because they did not understand that the German people like to have uh, higher quality products. Walmart is sometimes, most of the time in the US, considered to be a lower quality product. And in Germany, people did not really like that lower quality product. They looked down upon that. In Germany, people wanted to have higher quality product and they are willing to pay a higher price for that. And also, Walmart culture is in the US is considered to be very friendly. People talk to each other, people say hello, hi, bye. They chant Walmart songs. So they have greetings and songs and stuff like that in a lot of Walmart centers. But when they did those in Germany, people did not like it. Okay, people did not like a lot of greetings, right? The German people do not like things like that, right? In the US, when you buy your products, it's on the belt at the cashier's checkout point. So the people out there, they will bag your products, they will put that in a bag. It is expected here in the US, and customers like it, and people want it. Now, in Germany, people don't like that. People like to bag their own items, right? So the Germans will take their potatoes, they will put that in their bags. They will put the other things, oil, butter, or cheese, or whatever stuff they buy. They want to bag their own items. So the bagging service is not so much prevalent in Germany. And when Walmart workers were bagging those products for the German customers, the German customers did not like it, right? So those traditional practices need to be understood, right? If you don't understand those, your business is going to fail, right? So Walmart in Germany failed because people were smiling too much, they were greeting too much, they were overly friendly, they did not like the bagging service, right? So there's a lot of things which is based on culture and traditional practices that they did not observe. Hence, they failed, and they had to reinvent the model. Okay. Now, pressures for local responsiveness also depends on the differences that countries have in their distribution and marketing channels. So Germany has very few retailers that dominate the food market, but in Italy, it is fragmented all over the place, right? So there's a lot of retailers, a lot of small shops. In France, also a little bit like that. In many countries in India, India has the highest density of retailers or retail shops per square foot, right? Highest in the world. So which means that there's a lot of small shops everywhere out there in India. Anywhere you go in India, you will see a lot of small mom and pop shops, retail shops. They sell food, they sell clothing, they sell small technology equipments, and pretty much everything that you want. Okay, so it's very accessible. So the marketing and distribution channels are very different in those countries. In the US, sometimes in rural America, you have to drive a few miles to go to a big store, to get a big store. Sometimes you have to drive a little bit to go to a gas station or to go to a retail shop, right? So depending on the town, on the city, on the location, right, distribution channels needs to change, right? Now in Brazil, they have a 36% of Brazil's is like retail, right? But in Russia, it's just 1%. Okay, just 1% of retail. So that's a huge difference. And in the US, it's very hard. It's a very to do pharmaceutical drugs marketing and sales. You have to sell very aggressively, you must have a very aggressive sales force. Okay. In Japan, in the UK, it is a very soft sell. Right? So in the US, you must have a very strong labor force that can actually go and sell your pharmaceutical drugs. So you will have pharmaceutical representatives or medical representatives. They will go to the doctor's office. They will go to drug stores. They will need to go aggressively and convince those people that they have certain drugs that they need to purchase. So it's a very hard, very difficult, and very aggressive selling. So very lot of money is spent on that. Hard sell means a lot of money is being spent on that very aggressively, and it's very difficult also to make it happen. That's why we need to spend a lot of money on that. Another example of local responsiveness pressures is the host country government demands. Right? How is the government wanting you to be there, right? Are there any specific requirements um, that the government has in that country, and you need to honor that, right? So healthcare system is very important because a healthcare system is very different across countries, right? So healthcare system differences between countries require pharmaceutical firms to change their operating procedures, right? So just like I said, in the US, it's a very aggressive sales force is required to sell pharmaceutical drugs, right? In the UK, it's not like that. In Japan, it's not like that. Now, the government generally has the largest share of the healthcare budget. So they can dictate the policies, rules, laws and regulations, and clinical trials and testing and so on, right? So the government may demand that you behave in a certain way that follow certain rules and regulations. In India, for example, it's very difficult for large companies to just go into the retail sector. They do not want large companies to come in the retail sector in India. The government requires a joint venture, right? So Walmart, when they entered India, they had to joint venture with an Indian company called Bharti, listed here. They had to joint venture. So the mode of entry had to be a joint venture. It couldn't be an FDI. It couldn't be a licensing. It had to be a joint venture because the government required that to happen. So in some countries, the government may require you to partner with the locals in certain sectors, right? So in China, the government may require you to partner with someone in, I don't know, agriculture, or maybe in a high-tech industry, or in finance, or insurance, or healthcare. So it depends on which countries. So where does your company fit, right? So there are two pressures. Pressures for cost reduction on the vertical axis, and pressures for local responsiveness on the horizontal axis. Then you can see that there could be low pressures for local responsiveness on this side, or maybe as you move on this side, the pressures for local responsiveness goes up. So as you move to the right, the pressures for local responsiveness goes up. It means that you need to really respond to the local market needs. Okay, you cannot provide the same product that you provide in your home market in that foreign market. You have to change it, make it fit the local market needs. The pressures for cost reduction is low on this side. As you move up, the pressures for cost reduction is high up. So if they're high, there's a lot of competitors, you will be up here on the high element, right? The high portion of the chart. So then the final question is, you have pressures for cost reduction on one side, pressures for local responsiveness on the other side. When you merge these two pieces together, where do you fit? That is, which of these boxes you fall into. Are you firm A, firm B, firm C, or firm D? Okay. If you have a lot of pressure to reduce cost, okay, but you don't have a lot of pressure to respond to the local market needs. So you are low on this side and high on this side, your combination will give you firm A. So you are firm A. In this case, what we call it, the strategy is called a global standardization strategy. Right? The combination of high pressures for cost reduction, and low pressures for local responsiveness. On the other hand, if your pressures for cost reduction was low, but you had a high pressure to respond to the local market needs, so you're going to be a localization strategy, combination of low cost reduction pressures and high pressures to respond to the local market. So you're going to be a localization strategy. If your pressures were low and low on both sides, you're going to be facing an international strategy. And if your pressures were high and high on both sides, you're going to be adopting what we call a transnational strategy. So you have to go back to those elements we talked about, okay? Pressures for cost reduction, what kind of products you are, right? And pressures for local responsiveness based on consumer tastes and preferences, differences in infrastructure, traditional practices, distribution channels, marketing channels, government demands. And then the combination of those two things, two pressures, will give you your firm strategy, right? And the strategy will be one of those four strategies. Okay. Now, you as a company, you need to pick one of those strategies based on how much pressure you face in terms of cost reduction versus how much pressure you face in terms of local responsiveness, right? So the combination of those two things is going to give you your strategy. So firm A will be called a global standardization strategy. Firm B is a localization strategy. Firm C is a transnational strategy, and firm D is an international strategy. Okay. Now, a global standardization strategy, that is the firm A, focuses on increasing profitability and profit growth by reaping the cost reductions that come from economies of scale, learning effects, and location economics, right? The strategic goal is to pursue a low-cost strategy on a global scale. So you want to have a low-cost strategy because you're facing a high pressures for cost reduction, right? So you're facing a high pressures for cost reduction, that is you're here, high up here. Therefore, your strategy will be to cut back on your costs. That's your main focus. The focus is not on changing your product to adapt to the local market needs. So your pressure is really on cost reduction. So in that case, you're going to be facing a low-cost strategy. You're going to be pursuing a low-cost strategy on a global scale. Okay. Now, a localization strategy, which is firm B on this side, it means you have a low pressure for reduction of cost, but a high pressure to respond to the local market needs. So localization strategy focuses on increasing profitability by customizing your firm's goods or services so that they provide a good match to tastes and preferences in different national markets, right? So what happens here, you want to really customize your product to that particular market. An example is MTV, right? So MTV, Music Television, is a American company. They went to Europe, right? But when they went to Europe, they failed. They failed because they were providing all American music. So people in Europe, they speak a lot of languages: Italian, French, German, Polish, British, which is English, right? And Spanish and other languages. So people wanted to hear their kind of music from that company. The company was providing mostly American music. So people did not really like that, right? So it means that the company needs to pursue a localization strategy, okay? So localization is most appropriate when there are substantial differences across nations with regard to consumer tastes and preferences, but not so much cost reduction pressures. So cost pressures are not very intense, okay? So an example here, another example would be a nano car in India, right? So the nano car in India is a smaller car which is meant for the middle class or upper middle class. So it's a smaller car, therefore it is meant only for the Indian market. it works for the Indian market. It's a cheap car, right? So they need they needed a car to fit that local market. So they had to customize that car for the smaller family in India. They can't provide a large pickup truck in India. That's not going to work for that market, right? So that's an example here. A large pickup truck, however, would work in the United States. So the localization strategy here, if you're a firm that provides large pickup truck in the US, that will work. So that's localized for the US market. But the nano car works for the Indian market. The MTV customized with music based on different languages will work in Europe, right? So this is the example. A transnational strategy, okay, simultaneously try to achieve two things, right? A transnational strategy basically is here. So if there is high pressure to reduce costs and high pressure to respond to the local market needs, then you're going to be a transnational strategy. So a transnational strategy tries to achieve low costs through location economies, economies of scale and learning effects, and also differentiate the product across different geographic markets to account for local differences, right? And foster a multi-directional flow of skills between different subsidiaries in the firm's global network of operations. So you want to allow skills to flow. So a transnational strategy makes sense when cost pressures are intense. At the same time, pressures for local responsiveness are intense as well. So an example here would be Walmart. So Walmart wants to provide cheap products, right? Very affordable to pretty much everyone. So they have to compete with a lot of people out there, right? They have to cut back on your cost. So they face intense cost pressures. But also, just like we said, in Germany, they failed because they did not provide the services the Germans need. They failed in China because they did not provide the products the Chinese need. So they need to customize the product quite a bit to the local market needs. So Walmart is a good example of a transnational strategy, a firm that uses transnational strategy. Okay. And finally, an international strategy involves taking products first produced in the domestic market, and then you sell it internationally, and you don't customize the product that much, right? So international strategy would be you don't need to customize because there's low pressures for local responsiveness. You don't need to customize the product to what people want there because people are happy with the product as it is. And also, if you don't have pressures to reduce uh, cost, you're going to be low on this end as well. So the combination of those two gives you an international strategy. So basically, international strategy would be exporting. This is what exporting pretty much is. Okay, so you take a product made for the US market, you ship it to Belgium, you ship it to France, you ship it to Russia, you ship it to anywhere in the world without the need for customization too much, right? So basically, if you have a software that can be used across the world without the need to change it for the language and other things, if you have to change it for the language, then it becomes a localization strategy. If you can use it as it is, it becomes an international strategy, right? So back in the days when Xerox invented the photocopying machine back in the 60s, they produced a photocopying machine and then they sold it across the world. Okay, they ship it to Europe and people use it there in Europe without the need to customize the machine, right? So as it is, pretty much. So that's an international strategy, right? So these are the four strategies that international businesses employ. And you need to know which one is your strategy for your organization. Okay, if you're going to head a multinational organization tomorrow, you need to analyze the two pressures, the cost reduction pressures and the local responsiveness pressures. Okay, so those two is going to give you a combination of four strategies, and then you pick one that makes sense for you. And also what is important is there is strategy evolution over time. Some strategies may not work in the long term. For example, an international strategy that is exporting may not be viable in the long term, because in the long term, what happens, competition emerge, right? You have a lot of competitors that come up onto the scene. Therefore, it builds pressure for you. Therefore, your cost reduction pressures go up. As that goes up, you move into a GSS, which is a global standardization strategy, right? So to survive, firms may need to shift to a global standardization strategy or a transnational strategy before competition can really put you out of business. Similarly, a localization strategy may work for some time, but when competition comes, there is aggressive competition, then it may not sustain. Then firms move towards a transnational strategy, right? So as competitors emerge, the strategy here of international strategy and localization strategy don't really work. So from international, you have to move to a GSS or you move to a transnational. If you're localization, you have to move to a transnational, right? So as you see, firms tend to move north or in the northeast direction. So that's the evolution of strategy. So over time, for example, companies like Avon is a company, healthcare, a cosmetic product company. They have shampoos and cosmetics, all these different kinds of cosmetics. So initially, they employed an international strategy because they were just producing it and shipping it to the rest of the world. But as competitors evolve, they need to really customize those products to different geographic markets, right? So people, for example, in France, they may prefer to have I don't know, maybe more shining products on their skin, right? People in Brazil, maybe they'd be wanting to have different kind of hair products for their hair because the Brazilian hair is more frizzy kind of a hair, but Asian hair is a little bit straight hair. So the kind of product will be a little bit different for the Asian market compared to the Brazilian market. Or maybe the skin tone is different for Africa, for Brazil, for France, different parts of Europe, and for Asian market, to the Indian market, and stuff like that. Okay, so you have to really customize your product over time. If it is just a new product out brand new on the market, you're the sole supplier. Maybe as it is, it can work for an international strategy. But as competitors emerge in that space, you need to cut back on your cost because these pressures are building up. And also you need to maybe customize a little bit more to adapt to the local customer in that particular market, right? So this is about strategy, the evolution of international business strategies for companies. And please look at this lecture and try to understand that there are different combinations that can work, and whichever works the best for your company, you can employ that. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the lecture now. And this is the section on strategy about international business. So just quickly, as a quick recap, so we talk about the different cost reduction pressures and pressures to respond to the local market needs. So these are very two important dimensions that a company need to be looking at. And you combine those two to get 4 strategic choices, and then you need to pick one of those that makes most sense for your business. And something that works now may not work in the future. So which means in the future, there could be strategy evolution into a different strategic choice, right? So you move towards a transnational as you become bigger, as competitors emerge, and the market becomes more mature, and so on. And these strategies are going to help you maximize your not only your profit, but also your profit growth in those markets. That's the whole bottom line, right?